Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
What's going on, Internet? Eric Banholtz here, founder of Beard Brand, back again with another building an e-commerce business for Practical E-Commerce. I've got a really special guest on the other end, Ryan Michler. I was actually, I think it was guest number 9 or one of the early guests on his podcast, Order of Man. And that had been about 6 or 7 years ago. And since then, he's absolutely blown up using his podcast and his content and even a book to start to establish himself as an authority and build e-commerce site from there and really show you a lot of different ways that you can be successful in today's day and age. Ryan, welcome to the show. Why don't you go ahead and give a little elevator pitch for our listeners?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. Looking forward to the conversation. I was going to add a point of clarification. I looked it up. You were episode number 10, May 26th of 2015. So almost 5 years ago. Goes crazy.
Oh, man. You're a lot more organized than I am, clearly.
Just really fast on the Google search. That's about it. Yeah. So like you said, I'm the founder of Order of Man, which is an organization, a fraternity, if you want, all centered around giving men the tools, conversations, frameworks, resources they need to be more capable men. So we're helping these guys step up in their families, their businesses, their communities, wherever it is they're showing up. I just want to make sure that we're an optimal resource for these guys and allowing them to thrive and succeed and step up as leaders the way they want to. So it's been a good ride over the past 5 years. And I attribute a lot of our early success to guys like you and the rest of the crew that I met at Memfluential. So I really appreciate the boost early on.
Yeah, so Ryan is a very inspirational person. If you haven't subscribed to his podcast, I recommend you add it to your list, Order Man. He really provides a lot of insight on financial responsibility and kind of being a leader for your family, for your tribe, setting a good example for the world. Now, it's been a while since we last talked, and we were kind of talking about this before the show, but tell me a little bit about your role currently and your team set up at Order Man.
Yeah, so up until relatively recently, I was everything from podcast host to editor to website developer to social media guy. I mean, whatever role and responsibility had to be taken care of, it was me who was doing it. But over the past, I would say pretty heavily now over the past year, I've really tried to look at all of the tasks that need to be managed on a daily basis and have tried to bring in other people who are way better equipped to deal with that stuff. And then it frees up my time to be able to focus on the idea and the vision and where we're taking the direction and all of these types of higher level thinking. So I don't have employees, but I do have quite a few contractors who handle different tasks from podcast editing to making sure all of our social media content, YouTube videos, things like that get posted online. I don't have to worry about that. And then I have a fairly sizable crew that helps me administer our digital brotherhood called the Iron Council. So we have team leaders there. We have a network manager. We have some different roles. We now have an event coordinator. So I've really tried to outsource a lot of that stuff so I can focus on the higher level things here with Order of Man. It's been a good change, challenging, but a good change for sure.
Yeah. So let's break down your properties or assets or however you want to call them.
Sure.
As to like what's driving revenue. I don't know if you have like general percentages between your private community, the Iron Council, your store, and any kind of like advertising you're doing on your podcast.
Yeah. So the primary revenue model for us is what I had mentioned, our digital brotherhood called the Iron Council. And we've got over 500 members as part of that organization at this point. So when I started that about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, that's really all I knew how to do. I had listened to a podcast and they said, start a course, and that course developed and turned into this digital fraternity. But then, we have guys asking for merchandise or hats or shirts. And so that actually became a pretty large part of what we were doing relative to, what it was when it started. I would probably say the store generates anywhere from offhand, I would say 10 to 15% of our revenue. And then I would say 75%, maybe 70% is done through the Digital Brotherhood. And then we do some one-off things like courses. Occasionally those will pop up. And then also we do live events. So we do anywhere from 2 to 4 live events per year that tend to do pretty well.
So you're not doing any kind of sponsorship on your podcast at all?
I do that, but I don't really generally include that in the revenue because it isn't really a big model of ours. And I'm not focused. I get emails and messages every day from ad agencies who want to share and who want me to sponsor their stuff on the podcast and whatnot. And I just really haven't focused on that because I don't want to be pitching and hawking other people's wares that may or may not apply to what I'm doing, especially if I'm not using it. I'd much rather share what we have available internally and then worry about those external sources.
Yeah, I feel like you and I share such a similar outlook. You're essentially, what you've done with your business is built a business that you're in control of, right?
Yeah.
You kind of control the community, you control the message, you control your marketing. I assume your podcast is driving most of the awareness to your community, or are you also doing some paid ads out there?
No paid ads. I've never done any sort of paid advertising. I mean, the most I've ever done is just boosting, some Facebook posts or Instagram posts, things like that. So yeah, it's primarily the podcast and then our social media outlets. And one of the largest outlets that we have with regards to social media that has really been beneficial for us is our Facebook group. And we've got, I want to say right around 68 or so thousand men inside of our closed Facebook group at this point. So between the podcast and that group, we can generate a lot of excitement and talk about what it is we're doing and how we're growing. And as a book comes out or a new event becomes available, those are great resources to be able to tap into. And they're already built in, so they're there.
So your Facebook group, is that free for anyone or is that a paid group as well?
No, it's not paid. It's free for men. It's exclusively for men. And it's all they have to do is request access. And there's a few little barriers that we put up to make sure that these are guys who are, motivated to contribute in a meaningful way. And then we have a moderator team that really helps administer that group because it could quickly, and it has in the past, quickly get out of hand and deviate from the path that we want it to. So we stay pretty focused and tight over there.
Yeah. Is it, I would imagine there's just, when your product is essentially other people, right? It's the community. Yeah. It's vital to be able to curate that and make sure that topics stay on hand. Talk about some of the issues you had. And I would imagine the earlier days to getting that wrangled in and, what it takes to really build a successful community.
To me, it actually surprisingly wasn't the early days when it was, 500 guys or 1,000 guys or even 5,000 guys. It was much easier to manage than being close to 70,000 men. We get some trollery here and there. There's a lot of negative attitudes. We never have a problem with anybody disagreeing, but quite often it gets out of hand, or there's some disrespect there, or just being crude and rash and disgusting. And so we block those people, we get rid of those people. I'm just not interested in that. But if people want to have a disagreement and it's done in a healthy way, then by all means, let's do it. The other thing that we don't really allow, this is the right word, is these surface level things. Like we don't allow people to post memes. You can't post memes in the Facebook group because if you want a meme, you can do that on Facebook anywhere. We're trying to elevate the conversation that we're having. So that's something that we don't allow. Of course, we we do eliminate and minimize the self-promotional type stuff. You can't share links to your own sites and your own programs and your own things. And those three general rules right there is, hey, be respectful of each other. Don't spam the group, and let's have deeper, meaningful conversations. Those three general guidelines have really kept our group on track. As long as we communicate that expectation and then uphold it as well, which has been very important.
Yeah. Is that a matter of pinning a comment to the top, or is it something that you just kind of have to keep in the process of moderating, being like, hey, we deleted this post and here's why, keep it on topic to this?
Yeah, it's both. We have a pretty outlined guideline in the description of the group. And then it's also pinned at the top of the page with a video of me introducing new members to the group and what to expect. It's some deeper steps if they want to go. If they want to take this deeper, go to the Iron Council, for example, or here's our events, or here's our podcast. So it kind of directs people through navigating their first days in the Facebook group. But yeah, you have to stay on top of it too. And we have a list I just put together a standard operating procedure about a month or two ago for all of our moderators. So if you are a moderator to the Facebook group, you have to go through this standard operating procedure. And it talks about how to introduce new members, how to onboard them, if we need to let them go or what conversation to be having. And then I've outlined, I believe, if I remember correctly, there's anywhere from 10 to 12 guidelines. So if a moderator has to decline a post, for example, there's a preset built into a Facebook group where you can say this post was declined because it was self-promotional, for example. So we're giving that feedback to the members so they know and they can toe that line a little better and have the types of conversations we want to.
Sweet, man. When we talked back in May of 2015, episode 10, you hadn't had built any of this out, or if you had, it was very
early.
Let's go back to those early days, 5 years ago. If I remember correctly, this was a side hustle for you.
It was.
Talk about that kind of like founding story.
Yeah, so I started in March of 2015, so 2 months before we had talked. And I owned a financial planning practice at the time, which I know is your background as well. So I had a full-time financial planning practice. Things were going well. I was making great money and income and things were going smoothly, but I felt like there was something missing. So I actually started a podcast for that financial planning practice. It was called Wealth Anatomy, and it was geared towards providing financial advice and information to medical professionals. And I realized, man, I love this medium of podcasting, but I don't want to continue to have this like same conversation. So I was following some other people at the time. Brett McKay with Art of Manliness was one of them. And I really admired and respected what he did. And I thought, there's some opportunities here to talk about some of these issues and then help men bridge the gap between what we know, the information we have, and then what we're actually applying. And that's when I started. And then I went for about, I want to say 7 months or so before I even made my first dollar. Initially, I was going to do it as like an ad model where I would have ads available on the website and advertisements for the podcast. But I realized quickly I just didn't have the audience to make any money doing that. And I'm glad it worked out that way. But I got about 7 months into it, and my wife and I had a conversation one evening, and she's like, I really appreciate that you're doing this Order of Man thing, but you're not making any money and it's detracting from your practice. So that's taking away from household income. So you should probably scale back or maybe find a way to make a little money doing it. And I told her, I'm like, well, I'm not scaling back. If anything, I'm doubling down on this thing. So I had listened to a podcast and I can't even remember which one it was, but the guest who was on said to make a course available. I'm like, perfect, I'll do a course. So I want to say it was October-ish, November maybe of 2015. I released this course. It was called The Iron Council, and it was available for 12 men. That's it. And over a period of 12 weeks, we were going to discuss 6 topics that I had identified as being relevant. So we had a weekly call. They got an assignment per topic. And then we just had a Facebook group, a private group focused on this Iron Council membership. And we sold that out overnight. And I charged $100 for it. So I didn't know what to do. I was like, what do I do? Like, how do I do this? So like I said, that first month, October, November, we made $1,200, right? And we get 60 days into this thing. So 2/3 of the way through, and the guys are like, hey, like, what are we doing after this is over? And I hadn't even thought about it. I'm like, I don't know. Cause I still have my income coming in from the financial planning practice. But long story short, decided to open up the Iron Council and make it instead of just a short-term one-time course, open it up and turn it more into a membership. And we ramped that up to about 100 members fairly quickly when we opened it up in the beginning of 2016. And that's been on fire ever since. And I continue to develop that and grow that. We've moved away from Facebook and we've added some more features and benefits, and there's been some growing pains with that. But yeah, that's pretty much how it started. And then I should also say, about 1.5 years or so into the journey, I actually ended up selling my financial planning practice. So I was making enough income and generating enough revenue to be able to support my family at the time, and sold the financial planning practice. And now this is all I do. And I have been for the last 3 years or so, roughly.
Did you find that when you sold that practice and that business that you were able to essentially increase your productivity by 2-fold or 3-fold, or talk about that experience?
Oh yeah. Like we'll talk about that for sure. But even outside of the productivity, just the focus and clarity and the lack of stress that came with trying to do both. I remember I was in a point where I would have clients calling me and I'd see on the caller ID and I would I would just dread that somebody was calling me. And I knew that I wasn't doing them any services and I wasn't fulfilling my commitment to them either by behaving that way. So I knew that at that point it had really come. But yeah, there was just like a burden that was released from me and taken off my shoulders when I sold the practice. And yeah, I was able to exponentially put a lot more time, energy, effort into Order of Man. And we saw the exponential growth that came with being able to have that time freed up and the mental clarity and capacity.
Yeah. Is that one of your regrets that you didn't sell your practice earlier, or would it have even been better to just shut your doors?
Maybe. I don't really have that as a regret because I enjoyed my financial planning practice. And also I had a decent recurring income coming in. I had built up a residual income over the course of almost 10 years, about 9 years at that point. And I liked doing what I did. So I don't think it was a regret. It was just good. It was just good timing and it worked out. And that was a great chapter of my life. And this is another chapter of my life. So definitely not a regret. And I don't know that I even would have changed it earlier. I think I did it as best as I could have with the information I had at hand. And looking back, I think I did it right, even with more information I have now.
Sweet, man. When I do a lot of these podcasts, we think of like e-commerce as buy some products, you have this storefront, you sell the products.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, you've got a little bit of that's 10 to 15%. But I also consider the community almost as an e-commerce opportunity and the digital products as a e-commerce opportunity.
Oh, no
and
doubt.
Then what you've also done, which I think is really impressive, is like bridge the gap between online and offline and create these experiences you really can't get online. Can you talk a little bit more about how that strengthened your community?
Oh, definitely. So like I said, the primary mode of revenue for us is our digital brotherhood. But I remember waking up one night, I remember it was an evening and I woke up and I'm like, man, it would be really cool to get a bunch of us together and just do hard things. That was like my thought, like, let's just do some hard stuff. I wrote it down. I had a field notes little journal right by my nightstand and I wrote it down. And then I woke up the next morning and I got into my office and I started doing some research on lodges in the area. And I found one, and that day I put a deposit down on this lodge because my thought at the time was, when everybody else is zigging, maybe you ought to consider zagging. And everybody was going digital and everything continues to go more digital. And it's great and wonderful, but that means that there's this whole other gap, this potential for something face-to-face in person. And that seems like it's always better when you're talking about a community, is actually being face-to-face, seeing the nuances and the expressions and being able to, rub shoulders, and it just seemed better. So I put this deposit down and that must've been like a Thursday or a Friday. And then over the weekend, I just started second guessing myself. Like, what did I do? Why would I do? I don't know how I'm going to get these guys to come or why I would do this. Anyways, long story short, we ended up not selling a single ticket for this event.
Oh, man.
And I reached out to the company, the lodge that I had put the deposit down. And I said, hey, look, I don't have anybody coming. And he's like, nobody? I'm like, nobody, not a single soul signed up. And he's like, oh, that sucks. Well, you're going to lose your deposit. And I'm like, well, hold up. I knew that he was trying to build this business at the time. He had just bought this lodge and he was trying to ramp it up, and he's done a great job with it. But I said, would you be willing to work with me? Just keep my deposit, but would you be willing to apply it to the same thing, but I'm going to do it in 6 months? And he said, yeah, we can do that. It's more expensive in 6 months because we're during the season, but we'll still apply it. I'm like, okay, well, worst case scenario, I'm not any worse than I already am. So I'm like, cool, let's just do that. And I went back to the drawing board and learned how to market it and learned how to share it and continue to grow my organization over that 6-month period. And we ended up selling it out with 20 spots. It's all I made available. We call ourselves the Terrible 20. Still, we're the Terrible 20. And yeah, man, we just had a great weekend, 3.5 days of challenging, physically, mentally, emotionally demanding situations and experiences and helping each other through it. And it was very, very powerful. And then it also solidified the digital connections that we had. So a lot of the guys that came to that event were already members of the Iron Council. And what I noticed is that because they got together face to face, it was that much better. It was just magnified and reinforced because we had been face to face and experienced the hardship together.
Talk more about what you learned between that first round of pitches and the second round. And Did you have to kind of fall on your sword and say, hey, we didn't sell a single ticket? Or were you just like, hey, it got moved? And what was kind of like the marketing spin behind that?
I've always just been try to be honest, and so spin is not something that like I really subscribe to. Although I think you have to paint it in the right light. So maybe that is spin. I don't know if that's even the right word to use
Yeah,
necessarily.
how the messaging was delivered,
Right. So yeah, I've always been truthful. Look, guys, here's what we were gonna do, and I took ownership of it. And if I remember correctly, basically, I just came to these guys and I said, look, I shared this idea with you. It was my fault for not telling you what this all entailed and why it would be beneficial. And so, for lack of a better term, I just tightened everything up. So I became clear about, okay, well, what is it exactly that we're going to be doing? What is the outcome? Like when guys come to this event, what problems will they be looking to solve? What type of men would be willing to come or have a desire to come to an event like this? When they leave, what will that transformation look like? So I started answering these questions for myself. And that way, in the messaging, when I sent out emails and I talked about it in videos and on the podcast, the message was just crystallized. And so now it resonated with the right people that I had identified as men who would come to this event. Before it was just loose. It's like, hey, I have this thing that I'm kind of like thinking about doing and experimenting. And like nobody wants to spend, I want to say it was about $1,500. Nobody wants to spend $1,500 on somebody's experiment, right? So I had to get rid of that. Oh, I'm just going to try this and see if it works and assert myself a little bit more and having the confidence that I am going to put together a solid event. And here's why, and here's what it looks like, and here's what you'll get when you come to it. And those little changes made obviously a world of difference.
Now, the podcasts we talked about, the podcasts and the groups have been a big catalyst for building your community. You also wrote a book. Talk about the thought process behind that. And was that something worthwhile, or were there a lot of lessons learned from it?
Both. The reason I wrote the book is because I knew that it would be another medium to get my message out and to share it with people who wouldn't hear it via the podcast or be in the Facebook group. And so it was access to a whole nother group of men that, who reads books? Well, people that are motivated, ambitious, they want to learn, they want to apply, they want to grow. That's the type of people that want to, that read books. So I thought, well, this is a perfect audience. But the thing that I didn't realize in writing a book, and then I'll go back to how it benefited the community, is that it helped me crystallize and solidify my message so much more. Because before I wrote my book, which was 2 years ago, in February, it was 2 years, I could basically make claims and statements that didn't really need to be verified, right? Like I could just kind of run my mouth and talk about whatever, and nobody would really check me on it, and it wasn't going to be fact checked or anything like that. But then I wrote my book and I had an editor who said, hey, you said X, Y, and Z, but you don't have any supporting data or information for that claim. And what she taught me is that in a book, if you're going to make a claim or a statement, then you have to back that up, whether it's anecdotally or factually. There's got to be some backup and support of the argument that you're making. So what it did for me is it helped me get very, very clear on my messaging, and it challenged a lot of the things that I thought, like, do I really believe this? Is that true? And then I think it just helped me mature and definitely think out my thoughts a little bit more and make that much more impactful and powerful. But the thing that it did on a lot of different fronts with the community is that it gave me an added level of credibility with my community, because now I'm an author, right? So there's that added level of community authority, if you will. The thing that it did with our Iron Council is I actually wrote the book as the premise or the foundation for the work that we're doing in the Iron Council. So all of the members who are already in the Iron Council, this now became a requirement that they read this, and it became the foundational information for the way that we run that organization. So now anybody who comes into the Iron Council, it's a requirement. You have to read this book, because this is everything that we do in the council is based on the theories and the principles and the ideas that I lay out in the book itself. So it really gave me a path to run on that just wasn't there before. And again, it built up that authority and credibility with people who already knew me or people who had never met or heard about what we're doing.
Yeah. Would you find a lot of people are finding the book and kind of like moving into the community that way? Or is it still primarily going to be people who are familiar with you through your podcast or, maybe word of mouth or something like that? Or is there opportunity on the book as a lead generation, or I don't like the word lead generation, kind of like you, but more of like an awareness of your community?
I think there is some of that because I encourage men to share. And this is, I do get questions a lot from guys who are like, hey, I want to talk with my brother about what we have going on, but I don't really know how to do it. I'm like, just buy him a copy of the book and just send him a copy of the book and let him read it. So that's a great way and a non-threatening way for men who want to introduce what we're doing to other people. Now they have a medium for doing it. I haven't really focused too heavily on making this and we'll just use the term, even though maybe we don't both like the term, but like a quote unquote lead generation. I haven't really focused on that too heavily. But that said, sales continue to grow, even more so than when it first came out. So more and more people are finding it, more and more people are aware of it. And then I'm seeing more and more people mentioning it, adding it in their Instagram stories, sharing it outside of any requests that I've made of them. So it is nice because it's something tangible. And that was always actually the hard thing with the financial planning services is, and this is something I had thought a lot about over years of marketing my practice is how do you turn the intangible, which is like financial advice, into the tangible? And it's the same thing can be true of Order of Man. How do you turn information into something that people can quite literally with a book wrap their hands around? Anytime you can take concepts and theories and ideas and statements and contextualize them, the more success that you're going to have. And it's going to be easier for people to grasp onto and then to also share, which magnifies your message.
We talked about quickly before the call what your current role is and how it's moved from a task-oriented role as a single guy running Order of Man. You're still kind of that single man with contractors and with help, but what's the vision for the company? How are you going to continue to grow it? Where are the next plateaus you're going to get to, the mountains you're going to climb?
Yeah, so one of the things I've been thinking about forever is, and I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's the best way I've found to say it, is to codify masculinity. Because I ask all of my guests on the podcast, what does it mean to be a man? And now at this point, we've had over, I think, close to 300 answers to that question now. And what's interesting is I go through that, most of them are reoccurring or they fall within a couple of categories. And so it seems to me that most of us have, although there is some variance, but most of us at the foundational level understand what it means to be a man and have a desire to step into that. So I've thought a lot about how do you codify this? So men thrive best under challenge and competition. So within the Iron Council, most of the men who join that, they're most interested in some added level of accountability. And we've built into some of that to a degree, accountability to each other. But again, to come back to this codifying masculinity concept, what I am in the process of creating right now is, for lack of a better term, Boy Scouts for men. So now they have a path to run on. They have achievements that they can unlock. They have activities that they engage in. Based on the activities, they acquire experience points. Those experience points applied towards rank advancements within the Iron Council that add new benefits that are available and new responsibilities they'll have to step into as well. So that's consumed a lot of my time over the past several months. And we're in the process of developing an app and a program that will actually track their achievements, acknowledge them via a leaderboard. But really, I just want to make sure that we have this concept in place so men can compete against each other in a healthy way and then have something to actually strive for. And then there's a representation of their progress and growth. That's how we thrive. That's how I do. So I know a lot of men also thrive that way.
Yeah, and I think what's also impressive with what you've done with the Iron Council is you think about an online community and how it can continue to grow, and how many people do you really know? A couple hundred people, 1,000 people tops. But a community, you start getting into 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people, you run the risk of it kind of becoming its own thing. But you've done a really good job of almost having like a hierarchy within the community that you can still have those strong bonds. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when we got to about, if I remember correctly, it seemed right around the 120 to 130 member mark. I felt like I was losing a lot of the personal interaction and touch with the guys, which makes sense, right? Like you can interact with 20, but you can't interact well with 120. So I was listening to a podcast. I think I must have been listening to Jocko Willink, and he was talking about the concept of fire teams within squads. And these are men who operate under the main squad, but they're just a subgroup of this squad, and they're doing one assignment, another group's doing another assignment, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, okay, well, with 120, 130 guys, we can create what I've dubbed as battle teams. And so battle teams are teams of between 12 to 15 members. And now there's a battle team leader based on their work in the Iron Council and what they've been able to accomplish and their ability to lead effectively. And now we have 20 plus battle teams within the Iron Council. So I now interact directly with our team leaders, and then our team leaders interact directly with their own respective battle teams. So that hierarchy is very important because I wanted to maintain the personalized and individualized attention, but not have to do everything myself because it just isn't possible to leverage to that degree. So that was a strategy that I heard through military experience, and it has applied perfectly with what we're doing here.
Now, one of the advantages of being the face of the brand is that you're the face of the brand. Like you always bring value to the organization. Mm-hmm. But of course, the downside is you're always the face of the brand,
right?
And you have to do it. Like, do you have visions or strategies for, adding more faces to the brand or stepping away? Or do you want to kind of keep it at the size you're at now and just maintain that personality within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I like being the face of the organization. I really enjoy talking about what we address. I enjoy the challenges that come with it and the perspective and all the learning that goes on for our members, but also for me. But that said, I realize that there's also opportunities for other people to lead. So I've got a co-host on our Wednesday podcast. His name's Kip Sorensen, who has some tremendous insight into what it means to be a man. And he approaches it slightly different than I do. A lot of the same ideas, but slightly different. And I try to do, as best I can, a good enough job trying to lift other people up so that they can serve and they can lead. And then I try to get out of the way to the best of my ability. So I don't even host all of our weekly calls in the Iron Council anymore, not because I don't have a desire to do it, but because I want to give an opportunity for other men to step up, to lead, to be inspired. And then also it happens to be a leveraging tool as well, so that I don't have to do all of this all of the time. So I learned a long time ago, my background, even before financial planning, is retail clothing. And so that's my background. And I learned that my manager had taught me that great leaders don't produce followers, they produce other leaders. And so I look at my job now as not a bunch of people following me, but how can I get more people within my influence to lead so that they can be effective and we can leverage the things that we're doing.
Man, that's some really good insight to end it. But before we wrap it up, where can people learn more about you? Where can they find you? How can they follow you? What should they do?
Yeah, so orderofman.com is our website. And I usually direct people to our podcast, which is Order of Man. So wherever you're listening to podcast, just type Order of Man and you'll find us. And then you can connect with me on Twitter or Instagram, mostly at Ryan Michler. My last name is spelled Michler. So between those few sources, you can find everything that we're doing.
Sweet, man. Well, I'm really happy that I got to switch the roles on the podcast for once. You're a good friend of mine. I appreciate all the support and guidance you've given me over the years. And thank you for taking a half an hour out of my time to share your wisdom, just not with me, but also our listeners. You're a great man.
You bet, man. Appreciate the opportunities.
This has been another Building an E-Commerce Business. Your host, Eric Bandholz. As always, thanks for listening. Cheers and keep on growing.